Hello everyone, thank you for watching this video. In this video, we'll talk about common security terms and concepts behind that. This video is brought to you by Pragyan Technologies. We are located in Hennur in Bangalore, India, and we are one of the premium networking and security training institutes in India. So let's look at the topics that we are going to cover here. We'll start with CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Encryption. We'll also touch base on symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Hashing and how hashing can be used for integrity, and how hashing is used in authentication. So let's get started. So CIA in the information world stands for information security world stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So let's look at what is confidentiality. So confidentiality means that you have some data that's stored somewhere, and this data should be accessed or should be accessible to set of people. Now, if you maintaining confidentiality means that the information will only be accessible to the authorized personnel. If someone who is not supposed to have access to that data, they should not have access to it. For example, if you have some of your personal information that you have stored in your computer, and you don't want anybody else to know about it, that data should be accessible to you only, not to anybody else. And let's say your passwords and username and password, that should be accessible only to you. Nobody else should know what is your username and password. The same example can be extended. For example, in financial industry, all your financial information should be confidential to you and only to the relevant people. Similarly, in US, health records are considered to be confidential information. That means your health information should be accessible only to hospitals, healthcare professionals, and to the individuals this healthcare information is related to. So that's really what confidentiality means. So how can you ensure confidentiality? One of the way confidentiality is ensured if data is on storage is authentication and authorization. Right? So suppose you have stored your data in a computer. Now the computer should ensure that before anyone can access that data, they should be authenticated, their identity has to be verified, and it has to be confirmed that they are authorized person to access that information. So normally that's how you ensure integrity, confidentiality of the data when it's in storage. But let's take a situation when your data is traveling, right? You are logging into your internet banking website. Now, all your personal banking information, your transaction information is traveling for your computer to the internet banking site. So it's traveling over the network and possibly over the internet as well. Now, if anybody has access to the intermediate devices, the routers, switches, and cables, they may be able to capture all the information that are passing through these OS. And if they can interpret their data, then your confidentiality is compromised. So how do you ensure confidentiality when data is on transit? Unfortunately, when data is in transit, if somebody has access to any device on the path, then there is no way that you can ensure confidentiality other than transferring data itself. So what if you use something called encryption so that your data gets encrypted, and anybody receives the data, anybody intercepts the data, they will see the encrypted data, but they can't make sense of it. I think what is encryption we'll still talk about a little bit more in subsequent slides. So that's really what confidentiality is about. Now let's look at what is integrity. Now you have a set of data, you have stored it somewhere. This for banks, it may be their customers' account information. Who has how much money on their account? If someone can come and modify that information, then that's potentially a huge loss for those. So if someone can come and modify their data, that's a huge loss for the organization, for the banking environment. Right? So how do you the integrity is about making sure the data is not modified on the way. right? So that's what technology is typically used. The hashing or HMAC is typically used to identify any data compromise. Now let's look at the third component in information security. Third component is called availability. What is this availability is about? Availability is about ensuring that the information that you have stored, that's always accessible to the authorized person when he needs it. Why this is an information security issue? The reason it's an information security issue is there is a class of attacks. They are called denial of service attack or DOS attacks. The attackers can possibly disrupt your services by launching a DOS attack. Let's say you are responsible for a banking system. Now, if an attacker is able to launch a DOS attack and your banking system stops working, your business is going to come to an halt. Your legitimate users who should be able to access the internet banking system, they are not able to access that. So that's essentially a security problem. That's why the availability is a critical security problem. And then the high availability, you can apply different mechanisms. You can put DOS prevention, or you can build in redundancy also for giving high availability against system failures. Right? So if you talk to an information security professional, from information security perspective, these are the key and probably the only three important factors to ensure data security. Now you might ask, where does authentication, authorization, accounting, and the firewall, IDS, IPS, all that fits in? All these are technology pieces that are equally important. They are very important. But those technology pieces are necessary to make sure that confidentiality, integrity, and availability is maintained for the data. Right? For example, as I said already, authentication and authorization helps you maintain confidentiality. Your firewall will prevent hackers access your data, so it can stop confidentially. It can also be used for integrity. If there is a DOS attack, I think you can use DDoS mechanisms, and they are going to give you availability. So at the end, from data perspective, three most important factors, or only three important factors in IT security, is really confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So now let's look at some of the technology that are used to provide confidentiality. As we have already said a while ago, authentication and authorization helps you maintain confidentiality when data is in a storage. But when data is transit, it's moving from sender to receiver over the network. Anyone who have access to the network path can potentially see the data that you are sending. So how do you actually offer security there? The way you offer security there is encryption. So how encryption works? Encryption means that you have a set of secret info, and then typically encryption has an element called key. So you use the key to encrypt the data. So post encryption, you'll get a kind of a set of a scrambled data, and which is called ciphertext, right? So ciphertext, if you get the ciphertext and if you don't know the key, then you will not be able to find out what is the original data. Now the ciphertext can be sent from the sender to the receiver over the internet or over any regular network, maybe over the public network. Now, people who has access to the public network or the hackers, they might have access to your ciphertext. They might see that you're sending some kind of a scrambled data, but they will not be able to make any sense out of it. Whereas the receiver needs to have a key to decrypt this data. So what receiver is going to do is, receiver is going to take that ciphertext, and that's going to receiver will have a key to decrypt the data, and it will apply the decrypt function. Sorry, this should have been decrypt function, and then the outcome is going to be again the original text. So this way you can communicate your confidential information over a public network by using encryption. And if someone intercepts your data on the path, they will see the scrambled data, but they would not know the actual meaning. So what are the key elements of encryption? Some of the elements of encryption is plain text, that's the original text, and then you apply encryption or decryption algorithm, and then you get ciphertext, and there is a key to encrypt and decrypt, right? And on the receiver side, you take the ciphertext and you apply the decryption key and you decrypt the data and get the original text. Now we'll talk about two broad category of encryption. Two broad category of encryptions are symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption. So what is the difference? Symmetric encryption really means that the two keys that are used, the key for encryption and key for decryption, they are same. What that means, if the sender has to send some data encrypting using symmetric key, sender in a way needs to communicate to the receiver what key he is going to use to encrypt the data, so that receiver can use the same key to decrypt the data, right? So really it's the same key, and that can be used for encryption, and you apply the decryption function with the same key, you get that decrypted data. So some example of symmetric encryption algorithms are DAS, DES, data encryption standard, triple DAS, AES, and then now we look at what is asymmetric key encryption. The key, essentially what asymmetric key encryption means is your key 1 and key 2 are different. So that's why we call it asymmetric key. So there is a separate key for encryption, there is a separate key for decryption. So now, I hope it should be clear by now that really the secret here is the key. If someone can find out the key to decrypt the data, then really he can find out the secret message. So the more difficult it is to find the key, the more strong the encryption is. So normally the way encryption strength is defined is using the key length. What that means? That means if your key is 56-bit long, then the possible combinations of the key is 2 to the power 56. Right? So you have 2 to the power 56 possible keys, and for someone to guess the key and predict the key, it's going to require a lot of effort. You probably have to make it 2 to the power 56 attempts or half of it, depending on right? So now in an average half of it. So that's why the strength of encryption many times is referred as key strength. The longer the key, more strong the encryption is, more difficult it is to break the encryption. So if you are using DAS, for example, your encryption key is going to be 56. Now, these days, the encryption protocol you should be using is minimum triple DAS, but it's highly recommended that you use AES standard for symmetric key encryption. Now we'll talk about what are the common asymmetric key encryption algorithms. I have a slide for asymmetric. Okay, so the way asymmetric key encryption works is both sender and receiver, they have two keys. They are called key pairs. So sender will generate two keys. There is going to be some relationship between these two, right? And the relationship is, if you use the first key to encrypt the data, then you can decrypt it using second key. If you use the second key to encrypt the data, then you can decrypt it using the first key, right? So typically what happens is any device or any person will keep one of the key that's as a private key. So that means it's not going to be shared with anyone. And the second key that's going to be shared with everyone. So basically what's going to happen, if there are two parties who wants to communicate, both of them will generate a key pair and they're going to exchange their public key. So public key, the A's public key will be shared with B, B's public key will be shared with A. The other keys, they will keep it private. Now what's going to happen is, if A has to send something to B, what A is going to do is, A is going to take the data and is going to take B's public key and is going to encrypt the data using B's public key and is going to send it to B. Now on the way, and even if someone can intercept the data and get the encrypted data, for them to decrypt it, they will need B's private key because it was encrypted by B's public key, right? So only person who has B's private key is B, so that means nobody else other than B can decrypt the data. And the reverse is going to happen. If B needs to send something to A, what B is going to do is, B is going to take A's public key and is going to encrypt the data using B's public key, so that A as public key, and then only A will be able to decrypt the data. So this is essentially the key concept behind asymmetric key encryption. So the key concept is there is a private key, public key. There are two keys for each devices, and you will always encrypt the data using public key of the receiver, so that only receiver can decrypt it using its private key. So now, when are you going to use private? When are you going to use symmetric key? When are you going to use asymmetric key? So normally symmetric key encryption key lengths are smaller and the protocols are more efficient. So that means you can encrypt a lot of data faster. Whereas asymmetric key lengths are very large and then they are a lot more resource intensive. So that means if you are sending large amount of data, then you will probably use symmetric key. But what is the challenge of symmetric key? Challenge of symmetric key is how do you make sure that both the sender and receiver has the same key and nobody else has got the same key. So that's really the pros and cons of both symmetric key and asymmetric key. In real life, what protocol like SSL do is they will initially use asymmetric key. They will use asymmetric key to encrypt the symmetric key and then share the symmetric key, and subsequent data is going to be encrypted using symmetric key. So now let us look at the other very important technology in security, that is hashing. What is hash? Hash is again a mathematical function. It's called one-way function. So what does it mean? What it means by one-way function is, suppose you have some input data and you apply the hash function and you are going to get an output. And this output is always going to be of fixed length depending on the hash protocol, hash algorithm you use. If you use MD5, that output is always going to be 128 bit long. If it is SHA-1, then it's going to be 160 bit long. And the term one-way function means that if you got hold of the hash output, from that you cannot find out the original data. So original data can be of any length, and so there is an infinite possible combination of inputs. But at the end of hash function, your outputs are always of finite length. It's going to be either 128 or 160 bit output. Right? Also, few other properties of hash is hash functions are very sensitive function. What that means is, even if you modify 1 or 2 bits, right, you make a very small modification, your output is going to be different. Right? And from your output, you cannot find the input. Now let us look at what are the two common use cases for the hash function. First use case is to identify whether your data has been modified. Let's say you are sending some data and then you want to detect at the end, at the receiver end, has the data been modified. So while you are sending the data, you could send a hash as well. So you will take the initial data and you compute the hash and you send data as well as hash. At the receiving side, if you again compute the hash of the data, if data has changed, your hash would be different than the original hash. So you know that data has been modified. So that's the basic way of how you identify if data has been modified. Of course, in security scenario, you cannot just use it like this. You need to combine hash with something like HMAC, where you ensure that on the transit, nobody can modify the hash function also according to the modified data as hash function. Right? So if you want to know more about how it's being how it is really used, then look for HMAC, and or maybe if there is enough interest, I'll cover that in a separate session. So that's one function, one use case. What is the second use case? Another very common use case for hash is storing your password. Okay, let me give an example what this means. Let's say you have your email addresses, your email account. Say you have an email account in Google. So what happens? You log into Gmail and you create a username and password. So every time you log in, the Google is going to verify your username and password. That means Google has kept your username and password stored somewhere. Now, if that's the case, anyone who has access to the Google systems, their servers, the system administrators, they would potentially be able to see what is your username and password. Does this sound scary? Right? And I know many of you might be using the same password for your office account, for your banking account. So if the Google administrator has access to your password, he can now probably use the same password to log into your other systems. I hope you are able to realize the gravity of the problem. So that's definitely not a best practice, storing actual password into the system as it is. So what actually the typical systems do, that means the secure systems do, is instead of storing the actual password, it will compute a hash function of your password and it's going to store the hash function. So when you try to log in, what happens? You system prompts you for username and password. You supply username and then password, and system is going to compute the hash function and will compare how the hash functions are matching. And that way, they authenticate you if hash function matches. And if an administrator goes back and logs in into the system and finds out the password file, it's going to see the hash of the password. It's not going to see the real password. So you are a little bit more secure. Right? So these are, I think, the key things that we want to cover. So we have covered confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These three concepts are the primary and probably the only concepts for data security. Whereas there are many other underlying technology that's needed to make sure that these three are maintained. And then we have covered encryption and different type of encryption, symmetric, asymmetric, some examples of symmetric key encryption. We talked about hashing and how hashing provides data integrity, and also how hashing can be used for storing passwords and authentication. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have enjoyed the video. If yes, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave your comments. Have a good day. Thank you.